Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started today. Thank you everybody for joining us. I am Rhonda Velbeth, the coordinator for Connecting Young Nebraskans, also known as CYN. We are an affiliated fund of the Nebraska Community Foundation and a statewide network. Our mission is to empower young Nebraskans to connect, lead, and shape the future of our community and our state. Our network is made up of more than 800 individuals across Nebraska that traditionally gather at our biennial event, the CYN Summit. This year's theme is home, and it's currently scheduled for this fall. The CYN network was built to connect people, and there's no better time to connect and engage meaningful than right now. The Fund Advisory Committee feels the pain the nation is feeling, and we hear the voices calling for change, and change starts at home. We are committed to helping create an inclusive Nebraska where everyone can live without fear, fully participate in society, and feel at home in our communities. We are proud to start this new series, All Voices at the Table. Our facilitator today is Carlos Barcenas. Carlos is a speaker, coach, and facilitator with ichoosepurple Consulting. It focuses on intercultural leadership development. Carlos has lived in Nebraska since 1994 and has worked with people from all over the world who now call Nebraska their home. From assisting immigrants to transition into their new homes, to offering English classes, citizenship classes, leadership development, finding resources needed to succeed, Carlos can do it all. For the last 2 years, Carlos has worked with communities and coached community leaders across Nebraska in their intercultural development, as well as creating dialogue in organizations and communities about diversity, equality, and inclusion. So if you'd like any further information about Carlos or how he could help your communities, feel free to check out his website, which is ichoosepurple.com. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Carlos.
Thank you. And again, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time to be here and just join the conversation. Rhonda is gonna help us out here. We have something coming up where you're gonna have an opportunity to share with somebody in the participant list. We're gonna put you quick in breakout rooms. And here's the question. We're only gonna give you about a minute and a half to make sure to answer this question. So, why are we having this conversation? Why is it called All Voices at the Table? You know, I do believe that many times it's hard to have everybody at the table. However, we can work together to make sure that we have all voices at the table represented, be it in our communities, be it in the work that we do. So in that effort, why are we having this conversation? Because of what is happening right now with race, with what we're seeing in social media. Obviously, the death of George Floyd was a catalytic event for many, and that conversation, it's out there. And we've had people ask, what do we do? How do we handle? How do we learn? How do we approach this topic? How do we make things better? And I don't think anyone in this video call is a stranger to what is happening. And maybe you, like myself, I've been trying to figure out, how am I going to respond? How am I going to react to what is happening? So in the next minute and a half, just get ready. We're going to beam you out to a breakout room. And here's the question that I would like you to answer with your partner. What have you learned either about yourself in the last month, in the last couple of weeks, with everything that is happening? What's one thing that you've learned in this time? So Rhonda, when you're ready, send us out to breakout rooms. You have about a minute and a half. And your question is, what's one thing that you learned in the last month? Go ahead.
All right, so I'm going to send you in breakout rooms of 2 to 3 participants here for just a couple minutes.
Right, we're giving a chance here. Everybody's coming back, and I think most of them are back. Remember, at the bottom of your screen, you have a button that says reaction or in your participant, and you can clap and you can give thumbs up. So feel free to use those, or if you want to do silent claps, you can do that as well to let us know how things are going. So let's get started. I hope you had a good conversation. I had Tina from West Point and Stephen from York. Good conversation. So let's get us started and let's get going. So setting the stage, why are we here? Because we would like to know how to talk about race, how to talk about what is happening. We want to learn more. And a couple of things that I would offer you is, these conversations, these topics are non-closure. we are used to having closure on so many things, but this is one of the things that expect non-closure. We need to keep the conversation going. So I would like to introduce you to two good friends that am out education at Central Community College. He has worked in higher education for 17 years as an administrator, professor, and researcher. And I noticed that I'm having some issues with my audio. So Rhonda, if I happen to get frozen, would you just please take over? Um, he is a resident of Grand Island and is in the racial and social equality movement in Grand Island and Hastings community. Before moving to Nebraska, Beverly was an associate professor of physics at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. In addition to teaching physics, Beverly performed research on the environmental impacts of microplastics. His work focused on the characteristic microplastic using microscopy and spectroscopy. This is challenging my second language, Beverly, and investigating the environmental impacts of microplastics on low-income and minority populations. And he has also done research in nanoscience, which is focused mostly on using microscopy techniques to design methods for measuring electronic properties of nanostructures like capacitance, surface, charge, and resistance. And also we have today my friend Micah Madlock, who is out of Lincoln, Nebraska. He is currently an independent contractor operating a residential service for individuals with special needs. He's a certified personal trainer, has an undergrad degree in sports administration, has been in the health and human service field for over 10 years, working 5 years with Treble Youth at YRTC, following also being a team leader with the Lincoln Regional Center, working with adults. And along the way, he has also built a six-figure business in health and wellness field over the last 7 years. He prides himself on not letting obstacles and circumstances define him, and I have seen that and experienced that, had the opportunity to travel with him and hear him speak in front of thousands of people and coach at the individual level. So again, welcome, Micah. Dr. Clark, thank you for being here. And what can we expect today? I would like to give you both, Micah and Dr. Clark, an opportunity to take a few minutes to introduce what you want to share with us about you. And then we'll jump in a conversation where I do have some questions because I want to learn more from you. I want to learn more about how do we approach this topic and how this started for all those that have joined us. It really came out of a conversation with the CYN committee about how do we need to say something, we need to do something after the death of George Floyd. And there was, obviously, we seen the response and we didn't know what to do. And we figured, well, why not have a conversation and step into an comfortable space. So Dr. Clark, I would like to give you, if you want to share with us a little bit about you, whatever you want to share, then Mike, I'll give you the mic. And from there, I'll start with the questions. Dr. Clark.
Thanks so much, Carlos. I'll say good afternoon to everyone, and thanks so much for being part of this discussion. I work in higher education and have been in Grand Island in Nebraska for the past 2 years, and I've lived in Grand Island for the past year. What I hope today is to be able to have some discussions that will encourage you to rethink information or the narrative that's been presented on Black Americans and this idea of racism and racial injustice. So I hope that we'll be able to, share some information that you'll find helpful and insightful in this quest to better improve how we communicate, how we share information as a community, and how we take an active role as leaders in addressing some of these challenges in our community.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. Mr. Micah Madlock.
Hey, how you guys doing? I'm not the big public speaker, so I'm honored to be on this call. I didn't really know what it was all going to be about, but I'm ready to kind of just be an open book, get uncomfortable, and share. I'm kind of bringing a perspective is I grew up an inner city youth kid, in and out of the system on probation and stuff like that. And at the same time, as an adult, I've outgrown that. I work with people, whether it's for DHHS or just in direct sales business world, because I just love people, so I just kind of gravitate to people. And I just want to be kind of give broad perspectives, whether it was from my past or from the present of where I'm going, and then trying to be an open book for you guys.
Thank you, Micah. And you know, when he says he had no idea what this was all about, he's right in a way, because I said, hey, Micah, I need, I mentioned to the group something that happens, and I've experienced it as an immigrant to the United States, as someone that is of color in the United States. When something happens in the media, in our community that is highlighted by the media, there's a natural tendency for me to check on people around in my circle to say, hey, how things are going. So let's get this conversation started about George Floyd. I personally have not seen the video, and I know many of you maybe have. And I have not seen the video for this reason. And I have been looking for, how do I process all this? As an immigrant, somebody of color, I have the, I don't know if I want to call it the opportunity, or I have the chance to, I can see a video like that about every other week, or I get a message like that about every other week. It seems like there is this underground feed of things that you see happen. So I have not seen it because I was having a hard time already experiencing things. And at the same time, I've seen people try to process it and try to figure out, how do I respond to this? And I want to do something, right? I want to respond. I want to be part of this movement. So I have white friends in the community that are saying, what do I do? And some of them are saying, hey, this is new. I had no idea. And now I'm seeing it. Or some of them are saying, really, this happens? So how, I would like to hear from both of you. How do we have this conversation, and why do we have to wait until something happens that highlights the need for this conversation? So as you can tell, this is something that I'm still also struggling. How do we have that conversation? So let's, Beverly, Micah, let's us have a conversation with an audience and tell me, what are your thoughts? This happens. My 13-year-old has seen the video. Brings the questions. How do we talk to our youth? How do we talk to our kids? So who would like to go first?
Honestly, I have not watched the entire video. I actively chose not to. I've seen similar videos in the past, and honestly, I didn't feel like it would benefit me to watch something like that again. One of the things that I think stands out to me when I watch similar videos is the lack of humanity that I see. I think that we all have expectations that when we interact with police, that there will be some empathetic or some sympathetic component to that interaction. And when I watch videos similar to George Floyd's, it just seems to resonate that there is this lack of connection to humanity. There's a lack of connection with people of color and empathy. So, I watch an interaction that plays out that in essence, I think mirrors at times feelings that many people of color have felt in the community. I think the way that we have these discussions is very openly and very honestly. I think similar discussions that we're having today are very important. There's no way that we're able to overcome these types of situations without there being honest dialogue, without there being people willing to have the conversations and be honest about how they feel.
Yeah. This is a start. Just having these conversations, being open and honest. I did have an opportunity to watch the video. At first, when I heard the news, I was just kind of like, okay, another black man, died by police brutality or whatever. I didn't really think it was going to stand. It happens all the time. So I just kind of went about my everyday life. But after after a couple of days, I'm seeing everybody still outraged. I had to watch the video, and now that it hurt. Because we were talking about our last little group chat. Usually we all kind of find excuses of why that person's in that situation, or he's a felon, or he stole something, or he did this. And I'm not saying this, he did everything right, and you can tell by his background he had a past. He was trying to get over it. When I was watching the video, me being in the Health and Human Services, working with either troubled youth or people with disabilities who are highly assaultive, we're trained at a certain level to control those situations, whether it's a takedown or whether it's just de-escalating the situation. And so I'm looking at it as that point of view, firstly, as a professional, like, okay, he was in the wrong, they took him down or whatever. But then after a while, I found myself screaming at the phone, like, get off him, get off him, get off him. You know what I'm saying? And then as a professional Black man, we kind of look like, oh, that's not going to happen to me because I'm not doing that stuff no more. I get rid of that, or I don't hang with those type of people. When I'm watching the video, it's just like, if I had a bad day and whatever happened, and the police were called and I was taken to the ground because I'm a 6'2", 265 Black man with muscles that they're intimidated of. After that long, I could see myself, I have a little slight asthma, being like, hey, I can't breathe, please, get off of me. And for them to sit there, and watch what was happening, it was just like, enough is enough. And so like we were talking about in our last group, I still didn't know what to do. I still didn't know what to say. But when I'm seeing people who are African-American in our community who never touch on any of this stuff because, we're scared to speak out because of what we have to lose at the same time, speaking out, I was just like, the role I play in my community, I have to speak out to. And so,
Yeah, and I think, Micah, you raise a really good point. There seems to be an assumption that if you do something wrong, then the police have the ability to use whatever force they deem necessary. And, I would like to challenge our thought process on that because, if we think about our own personal lives, there have been times that we've all done things wrong, or we've been in situations where maybe if we would have interacted with a police officer, maybe we would have been in violation of some law, some statute. But I think the idea that because you have committed, and a lot of what we're talking about is, people who have, if at all, have committed any kind of crime, it's something that was nonviolent, but it leads to their death at the hands of police. And I think that we need to start to have discussions that address why, when people interact with Black Americans, there's this heightened sense of fear. And in the case of police officers, why this heightened sense of fear leads to a use of deadly force when there's an interaction.
Thank you, guys. And I'm sorry, I had a power outage, took me out, but I'm back in. One of the things that I think in everything that you've mentioned, so people are trying still to process, what do we do? How do I do this? And brings me back to this idea of we are trying, and I've talked this with Micah, with both of you, we're trying to address, how do you address police brutality? And there is this backlash of people saying, well, we say Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. Well, now Blue Lives Matter. And I think it's a natural reaction that we're trying to defend our identity or those that are near and dear to us. And one of the things that I've encouraged people is, how do you pause? And how do you pause and address one thing at a time? So for many of us that are in rural communities, maybe, or we don't have a chance to interact with people of color, what can we do? What can people do, as you mentioned, challenging our idea of how things should be, that we're not so defensive, but really get to the deep issue of, I know things are different. I've had great encounters with police. There's a couple that I could have gone different, right? And I have my hesitations. But when things like this happen, I know the color of my skin goes with me. So when I travel in the state or out of state, I do take certain precautions that I normally, they just have to be aware of it. So can you speak of when things like this happen, how do we not get so defensive? Or how do we really talk about, we're trying to put light in an issue that has been happening in Black America for years?
Micah, would you like to go first?
I'll try, and then you can slam dunk it probably. I don't know. Growing up in Lincoln, Nebraska, I was a track athlete, football star, stuff like that. I didn't really as a kid, I mean, you don't really see racism like that, especially in the inner cities like that, because where our schools are combined, everybody's hanging out with everybody, it's fun. But after high school, my first school was a rural small town, just only like 45 minutes away. And that was the first time in my life that I didn't have friends and nobody really talked to me, that I walked by the campus and people would walk to the other side. And it wasn't that they didn't dislike me as a person. After people started to get to know me as semester went on, they would speak to me a little bit more. But it was more just that, like you said, you're not exposed to African Americans growing up. You only see what you see on TV, and on TV you're just the rappers, the gangbangers, etc. So yeah, of course you're going to be scared, afraid. You know, even as an African American, we sometimes fear each other. You see what I'm saying? And so it's a big issue, but you know, for the rural towns, you know, it's tough. This is, I mean, for where we're at in the world, this is exactly how you do it, is you get on a panel and you talk to some people going through the pain. And you listen first before you comment. And I figure everybody right now is just saying all these opinions and not hearing the other person's pain, right, on both sides, you know. I know Margaret's on this one. She's a Lincoln police officer. One of my good friends and high school teammates is the head of the SWAT out here in Lincoln, Nebraska. And so he's in a tough situation, but you know, there's no right or right side on this. We just have to learn how to get together, communicate, and figure out how what's been done to the African American race over 400 years is not going to happen overnight with the fixing of it, but at least how we can get on the right page together.
Yeah, you know, Micah touches on an interesting point. I think when we get into these discussions, I think the point gets lost that, you know, people of color have family members, have friends, have loved ones who serve as police. I grew up in a community where many of the people who worked for the police looked like me and were in our community. We went to church together. So I think when you hear, you know, information coming out that's related to Black Lives Matter, there's this hijacking of that narrative, and they compare it to Blue Lives Matter as if to imply, if you are concerned with the well-being of Black people, that you don't have concern for the well-being of police officers. And that's a false narrative. That's a piece of information that is used to deconstruct the efforts of individuals to bring attention to concerns of the African American community. You know, I believe our discussions as a community need to focus more on racial bias or racial insensitivity than necessarily branding people as racists. The majority of people I encounter, and this is in my opinion, you know, I would describe them more so as having a bias than being racist. So what this means is there is some tendency to choose or to favor people who look like you, and most of the time that's based on some misconception or false narrative that has been shared. So I mean, don't get me wrong. I think there are citizens in this country, people in Nebraska who are racist, no doubt about that. But the term racist has almost become an excuse for Americans not to listen. I believe we need to make substantial progress in this country. We could make substantial progress if we can help people to understand that because of learned behavior, because of bad experiences, because of implicit biases, we do things that are racially insensitive or indifferent, and oftentimes these actions can be portrayed as racist. I think this is something that we all fall victim to, and it's something that we see playing out in our police force quite commonly. So, you know, as a country, I would welcome the opportunity for us to have more discussions about how we can move past our own biases, how we move past these ideas that have been passed down through family discussion, through behaviors that aren't necessarily conducive to inclusion and diversity. And I think that what we see is the police force being a microcosm for some of these issues.
Thank you. And, you know, let me pause for a minute and just tell everybody, I think this is very important. And Micah, Dr. Clark, you guys come with your experience. I come with my experience. So, maybe there's things that we're going to approach we don't know how to say, or just pause the judgment for a minute and just kind of hear it and have that conversation and hear what's being said. And something that has helped me a lot is that, accepting doesn't mean agreeing. So that we can sit down and accept this conversation. And we might not agree on some things, but we have to take the time to listen. So there's so many good things happening in our communities. There's so many things happening, which bring me to the next concept of color blindness. And I get the idea and I get the intent behind, hey, I'm not racist or I'm not prejudiced or we're a good community and we should all be color blind. But one of the things that I can't remember who said it, but we can't appreciate diversity without really seeing the color, without really seeing the differences. So, I know the intent might be saying, hey, we're all the same, we're a human race, we're human beings. But if you can't see me as a brown individual, if you can't see the depthness of what makes me who I am, then can we really appreciate each other? And if we're really going to say we appreciate diversity, but not address the disparities, is that
I think I lost the last part of what Carlos is saying.
Yeah, it looks like Carlos froze up
so
a
for
little
those
bit.
that
Oh,
are
perfect.
saying color blindness, and what has been your experience? What has been your approach? Because if we're going to be colorblind, we're missing a lot of the depthness to the human experience. So what would be your thoughts on that?
In all honesty, I don't think that this idea of being colorblind is realistic. We all are visual. We see what's in front of us, and I think the more appropriate approach would be to address whatever the biases are or whatever the fears are that people have by communicating or interacting with people that are different than them. In my life, I know that I see color. I see color every day. I know from experiences in my neighborhood, from experiences, in just every aspect of my life, I know that my color is an issue. Micah related to this earlier. Walking down a street and having, in particular, white women, veer completely off of the sidewalk when there's plenty of room for them to pass by me, or, going out for a walk in the morning and watching, white women literally stop and change their direction in order to let me pass by before resuming their walks. Clearly, there is some reaction that occurs because of them seeing me and seeing my color. Maybe that's my size, maybe it's color, maybe it's a combination, but I think for us to say that we're colorblind provides an excuse for us not to really look at how we see the world and how we interact with others. And I think that it's important for us to acknowledge the fact that we may have some of these apprehensions, we may have some of these fears, but then we can address the root cause and start to work through some of these things that I really believe are based in false information or based in a stereotype that has been passed along from old Jim Crow era, and we can move past some of these misconceptions.
Thank you. Micah, anything you'd like to add there?
It's tough to speak after him, I'll tell you that. He's back to Beverly, you're amazing. But
there you go.
No,
So,
I don't see colorblind. I mean, colorblind that's what makes America beautiful, is the mixing pot of America. So you have to see the color, you have to see that diversity, and just kind of like you said, it's just get rid of the biases and have some of the conversation. I like to talk to Carlos. I love the tacos he brings to me and stuff like that. But I like to talk to him because I like to hear his story and his experiences, and then that's some of the stuff that I can use in my life to keep growing, or to get over some obstacles, or to relate with another youth that has come over from Mexico probably, and now he's locked up in my facility, that I can kind of understand what's going on back there to even put him in that situation. And same thing for some of the African Americans in America. We don't think all white people are evil. We hate white people, nothing like that. It's just that sometimes when there's a situation like this that occurs and you hear the word Black Lives Matter comes up, something like that, we're not saying all lives don't matter, white lives don't matter, or anything like that. It's just we're hurt and we're expressing ourselves in a way that we would ask you to, like, all right, there's 20 million of us, not exaggerating, but there's a lot of us getting killed, but not one person getting prosecuted. Does the Black Lives Matter then? If you can just kill us like you've always been able to and there's no consequences for it. That's the way I looked at it, though. You know what I'm saying? And so the message of it and that Colin Kaepernick thing, I remember when that thing came out, I was on an incentive trip in Florida where I was hosting people. You know, I'm the only African-American there, and a lot of them were actually rural Nebraskans and a couple city guys. And when I heard it, I was like, yeah, okay, I get it. But, you know, I had to listen to their viewpoints, and it was a big fight, and I kind of had to just take the back seat to it. But I understood what they were saying, but I guess the bias of it is that my ancestors and my grandpa and my great-grandpa weren't fighting in those same wars with you. You see what I'm saying? And you're not listening to the message where it's not about the flag, it's not about the government, it's just about the message. And it's a peaceful protest like you always asked us to do. And so it's just, you know, yeah, I don't know exactly how to say it, but you can't be colorblind. You know, that's what makes America so beautiful. It's just, like you said, Doctor, kind of take down some of those biases.
Thank you, Mike. And, you know, that brings me to this. Two things that I want to touch, you know, how history plays a role in Black America, in the American overall culture. Well, that's one thing. But one of the things that I saw with Minnesota happening and the riots happening, and we see this in the 60s as well, and you brought Kaepernick. One of the things, if we've had a conversation in the last month, something that I've told you is, one thing that I really wanted people to say was, hey, Black America, we're with you. And that's it. But it seems like I was listening, well, we're with you. We were with you until you started rioting. Well, we were with you until you complained about this. We were with you because if you would have done it peacefully, it would have been different. And even though, you know, Kaepernick, it was done peacefully. So there was a narrative of, it doesn't matter how, we have a hurting community in the Black community in America. And it is a multi-layer. I mean, this is not something that we're going to fix right away. We need a deep dive. But I wanted people just to say, hey, don't give me a but. Just give me, hey, yes, we recognize this, but don't stop there. Don't go, but you should have done this different. You should have done this. So I created frustration. And I know that it's been hard to understand, you know, why would you destroy your own communities? And something that helped me understand it, it's just like my 5-year-old. My 5-year-old built a Lego thing that his brother took away. And he was so frustrated and he couldn't tell me what was happening that he himself took it and destroyed it. And, you know, it was a relation, to me, it brought to light how there are so many things that have happened that we want to address. And many times we don't have that voice, so violence comes out. Now, does that mean that all the rioters, that what happened? No, there are some people that were at fault. It was used, it was hijacked. There's so many other things. But can you speak to this feeling of, well, if you just would have done it this way, we would have hurt you, if that makes sense?
Yeah, you know, I had a discussion with a friend, and here was the scenario that I posed to him. I said, you know, think about what it would take before you lost your composure. Would it take someone, you know, tossing your son to the ground and choking him? Would it take your son being shot 5 times, walking home with a bag of Skittles? Would it take, you know, your son being choked to death because of a cigarette? Like, at what point would enough be enough and you reach that point where you lose control? As a, you know, just as a normal everyday person, you know, there have been times in my life that I have been extremely angry because of something that happened. And, you know, we all try not to get to that point where we lose control. But if you think about a group of people who have systemically experienced racism, and in particular, through how they are being policed, how they are being treated in the judicial system. At some point, it creates an anger that it's indescribable. I don't think anyone is going to say that, rioting or burning down or destroying property is acceptable. But what I will say is, we have to understand the context upon which some of this pain, some of this anger has developed. And we have to try to understand what it would be like if you were part of a community where your concerns, your feelings, all of these things are marginalized. If you add into that this idea, and you mentioned history, Carlos, if you add into this the idea that the largest majority of the history of this country, right, if we look at the total span of the existence of the United States, the largest majority of that incorporates the story of slavery, the story of racism, the story of indigenous people. And it's not something that people just get over and move past. We haven't addressed some of these issues that lead to how people feel about people of color in this country. And I think until we're able to do so, it becomes difficult for us to have genuine, open, and honest conversations.
Thank you. Micah, anything you want to add? Because otherwise I have another question for you.
It's just, what was I going to say? I'm coming from it from two different sides. So I know Dr. Beverly would never be out there. I wasn't, ever out there rioting. And I know a lot of African Americans who weren't, that's just not what they do. That's not how they see the answer, right? But even in the 60s, there's kind of two ways to get people's attention. There's the Martin Luther King way, and then you have the Black Panthers way type stuff. Not saying the Black Panthers were violent with, if you're not going to protect our streets, we're going to protect our own neighborhoods, okay? And they were scary because of the guns and the right to bear arms, and they're using their amendments, and they could talk, they knew their stuff, and it was intimidating to people. Now, I'm never going to say the rioting and burning communities is okay, but a lot of it isn't just the African Americans. Right now, what's going on, you got the Black Lives Matter thing. You got a whole bunch of people pissed off at the government just because of the coronavirus shutdown stuff. You have a perfect time for, on the other side, to jump into these things with the mask on, act like you're Black Lives rallying, and you're tearing up some stuff, okay? But for the most part, I think we've always started with a peaceful protest until it gets to the point where you're just not being heard. And a lot of those people who are out there rioting are probably your inner city, low income African Americans who know they don't have a voice, know they're tired of seeing it, and the only way they know how to get their emotions and frustration off is through violence and anger and tearing some stuff up. And so, it's, you have two different spectrums of it, but that doesn't make it all African Americans. When something happens, this is how we handle stuff. And same with the, on the white side too, is I'm not, like I said a million times, I don't feel like all white people are bad and all white people don't understand. It's just that media is doing some stuff, and you just gotta. It's ugly. But I'll let you talk, Dr. Beverly.
Well, yeah, I think it's important that we know our history, and if we look back in history, we can find times where, there were white riots where they were burning down Black communities. A lot of you, well, maybe you've heard, in the past few weeks, because this is the kind of information that has come to light about, the Tulsa massacre, the Tulsa riots, in which, a very successful, Black community was burned to the ground, and Blacks were murdered by whites who decided to riot because of a lie, because of something that they claimed happened to a white young lady, but it did not. I think that as a country, we have to be very careful about being selective in our self-righteousness. If we're going to deem something inexcusable for one, then we have to deem it inexcusable for all. And if we're not going to actively do that, then we have to be very careful, because what occurs is this impression that we are biased in some way towards one ethnic group as opposed to another. You know, again, I don't think that a lot of what we see, or the responses that we see from people, are necessarily racist. But I do think that there are a number of responses that are being generated by this bias or misconception that people have had for so long, and we just have not addressed that. You know, people are hijacking the issue. If you look at why the protesting is occurring, all of those reasons are absolutely valid. And we need more people to be involved and to share that message and to get that out, right? We have to change that narrative, this idea that it's okay to treat people of color any kind of way when they have an interaction with the police, or it's okay to run, you know, a black man down in the street and shoot him because you perceive them as being a threat. We got to move past those types of actions, and those types of things, I think, are fueled by misconceptions and the unwillingness to have the conversations to correct some of those things.
Well, and you know, we're getting close to our time, and we do have some questions on the dock here, and I do want to highlight that this biases. Yes, we got to get better. I think that's one of the keys that, and even when we're addressing police brutality, you know, the call was not all Black Americans hating police and not policing, but it was a call for higher accountability. You know, and how can we help everybody in our community call each other out to a higher sense of accountability? You know, you cited in one of my presentations, call me out on privilege, in the sense of call me in, not out. But I said, hey, let's talk more about privilege. So we did. My experience as an immigrant to the United States is very different than Black America. And I've had conversations, and if we're going to get into those conversations, I just think the history is very important. So I'm going to get to some questions here, and hopefully then we'll open it up to anybody that is alive that wants to ask a question. So here we go. First question. My Midwestern friends that are persons of color feel like they are Asians or Blacks raised as a white person. How do we create communities that don't make our neighbors of color lose their racial identity? Or how do we acknowledge or embrace color rather than ignore it?
You know what? I actually have an answer for that question. And it gets us back to what you just mentioned about history. I think that what we have to understand is Black history and Black culture is American culture. And I think if we look at how we have viewed contributions of people of color, we've kind of isolated it into some subgroup of American history, as opposed to it just being one of the many parts of American history. I think the only way that we're able to create environments where people of color don't feel marginalized is for there to be an appreciation for all of American history. And that shouldn't have to be, labeled as Black history, or, Native American history, or Latinx history. It should be the contributions of all Americans and how those contributions have improved our society. I think if we can move away from this idea of disassociating success, prosperity, the American way, if we can move away from the disassociation of those ideals from people of color, then we can start to create environments in which we can have positive dialogue. Everyone can feel respected, and you don't have that marginalized sense from one group or another.
Perfect. Micah, anything else to add, or I'll move to the next question? I want to make sure I get everybody.
That's fine.
All right. So I have been reading so much lately and realizing how much American history has been left out and has been told only from the perspective of the victor, aka white men. Can you speak to the lack of truthful American history taught in our educational systems, especially pertaining to slavery, Jim Crow, lynchings, and now mass incarceration? It's a lot in there.
I'll let Dr. Beverly slam dunk it. I'll just kind of kick it off. I feel like it's getting more and more and more left out, even from when I was in school. And I actually had an opportunity to play junior college out in California, San Diego. And then we had a African-American caucus out there where they had a whole bunch of African-American studies. That little 2 years out there in California is where I learned pretty much half of my African-American history, about what was really going on, about the Oklahoma City bombing that Dr. Beverly was talking about earlier, Greenwood, all the stuff that, we try to erase I believe it's because of shame, that we try to erase and try to act like America, the land of opportunity, free. And it is for some, but for others, it's not. And, just because they stop the legalization of segregation, but there hasn't always been the reason. Okay, going backwards, they stopped the legalization of segregation. But Dr. Beverly's talking about the man jogging and getting killed because he was in the wrong neighborhood. That's basically segregation. Like, you're not supposed to be here. You're doing something wrong. We can take you out. It's the death sentence because you were in here. Just like it used to be back in the days when you went into a restaurant you weren't supposed to be in, it could be a death sentence for you. So the legalization of some of that stuff is gone, but it hasn't all changed. And so I'll send it over to you, Dr. Beverly.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. What I think we've noticed is if we want to change some of the history, we want to change the messages that are being sent, we have to make changes from the top down and from the bottom up. We've got to look at our institutions. We've got to look at our businesses. We need leadership that is representative of the country. So if you work for a business that has a board and there are no people of color on that board, that's a problem. If you work for an institution and there are no people on the governing board, or there are no leaders in that institution that are people of color, and I'm going to even include in this discussion women or people who are from the LGBTQ community, you have a problem. I think the only way to ensure that American history is told and not told from a skewed standpoint or viewpoint is to make sure that we have the representation of all people in every aspect. It's not just enough for a business to employ Black people. There has to be more. There has to be representation in leadership. The CAOs have to be people of color. The individuals that are making decisions, the governing bodies have to include individuals who will think in ways that bring light to, every situation, not just situations for one group of people, but for all of us as citizens of this country.
Thank you. And again, I apologize. I have such bad connections today. We had storms last night and power outage keeps taking my Zoom out. So I'm on my phone now, but we have 5 more minutes to wrap up. We have 3 more questions, and then I do want to open it up. And I like this one. Seems like having this conversation is difficult even when among friends, or like today, friendliness. Is there a way to have this conversation when among racists?
So wow. Okay. Here's what I will say. Part of the reason, as a Black man, part of the reason why I try to participate in these types of events is because I feel like I have the ability to reach some white individuals that, others can't. So to some extent, I think because of my position in the community, I have the ability to speak to some people that may not ever hear this type of message. And so I try to be a good steward of that responsibility and use it in a positive way. I think for many white Americans, you have the opportunity, you have the chance to have some of those conversations with friends, with family members, and you can share what you know to be true. I'm not saying that any of us ought to go out here and get into an argument with a racist, because quite frankly, I don't know if it's going to make an impact. But what I will say is it is important that we don't support those beliefs. Sometimes that can be supported through silence. You not saying anything in a situation supports those types of beliefs, or you just thinking that, well, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't apply to me. So I just think that we all, one, have to educate ourselves and know our history and be good stewards of that information. We have to use it in ways that uplift our community. And when we use the word community, that word does not imply a color. It does not imply a socioeconomic status. It does not imply any kind of gender identity. Community is all-encompassing, and I think that we have to take an all-encompassing approach to how we embrace everyone in our community.
Thank you. And Rhonda, I'm just going to ask you, I can't see everybody's awesome faces, but if there's somebody that wants to ask a question, just be ready. You kind of covered the next question. I'm going to read them both. They're similar. I want to be a vocal supporter of the BLM movement, but I'm afraid to post on social media. For instance, will it come off as virtue signaling? Any advice showing my support without making it about me, a white woman? The next question is, with language being such a powerful tool, how can we address certain phrases being used publicly, but having different understanding interpretations by people? For example, privilege, Black Lives Matter, racist, and you did touch a little bit on that, and I think it's a good point that I encourage when I'm working with community and having these conversations, even with the committee at CYN, I told them, hey, you have my full permission, not that you need it, to ask and say any questions when we're talking about these topics, because it is hard. It seems like, am I going to offend you? What do I say? But terms matter, and getting to know our history matters. And, it helps, I think, when we have this mentality of either or instead of either or, both and, because there's so many things we need to address. So I don't know if you both have anything to add along those lines. If not, Ron, I would also ask if there's any question, we'll go to that. So Micah, Dr. Clark?
I would just say the social media thing, you got to understand there are white Americans marching with Dr. Martin Luther King too, back in the day. And so think about what they had to go through in their communities to make that stand, okay? And so right now with the social media posts, that is your platform as an American right now to get your voice across, make your stand. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm watching a lot of people's social media posts just to see what side are they on, you know what I'm saying, or how do they feel about this, or if they've reached out to me personally. I want to see what kind of how you feel. I'm not judging you, not saying I'm never going to talk to you again, but I just kind of want to see your viewpoint on this stuff. And so I feel like right now, social media is how you kind of get your point across. Pick your battles, like going into the last conversation. Don't sit here and argue with somebody. But if you feel that you're for Black Lives Matter or you're for All Lives Matter, just stay it, and be proud of who you are. And people are always going to hate on you anyways, whether you're in the right or the wrong. So just do your thing and make. This is a time everybody's got to take a stand. I feel like, right, one side or the other, you got to take a stand, and you can't be afraid of what's going to happen to you. A lot of questions, Dr. Beverly, like as a Black man, you already have a strike on you, okay? And now, right now, for you to be doing good, and Dr. Beverly's making money, he's doing good, he's doing this. Why is he so upset and talking about it? He's not those inner city guys are talking about. It doesn't matter. He's still taking a stand because he knows what he represents. He is the voice for all the other guys who grew up in poverty, don't have the education, can't get the language barrier, the American language to communicate with you guys. And I am at that too. And so I had to take a stand just because I know what I mean to my community too, just like Dr. Beverly said.
Yeah, you're totally right, Micah. And, I'll add to that, your actions are important. Don't be hypocritical in the things you say versus what you do. In my mind, I'm not as much concerned with what you say. It's what I see you doing, how you're helping the community. I think that is the biggest message that you can send anyone, is doing things that are actionable. So, I say Black Lives Matter, but the things that I do in my everyday life have to support that. And I say for you all, being part of discussions like this, that's an excellent thing to do. Whatever information that you learn here, share it with your community, share it with friends. find a way to get involved in an actionable way, not just, discussion, but find a way to take discussion and transition it into action, and try to do this in your communities. I mean, we all have to start off locally. And if we can make a change locally, then that can become something regional, statewide, nationwide, and then we can have, the change that we'd like to see in our country.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank both of you for your time. Rhonda, I would like to pass it on to you. I mean, this has been good for me. It's just, again, a conversation that we need to have, and I know it happens behind closed doors, but we want to open that conversation to leaders around our communities, because the change starts individually. It starts with us. So, Rhonda, Carrie, I know Jonathan was there too, so I'll pass it on to you.
Am I taking us home, Rhonda? All right. First of all, can we all give a big Zoom round of applause, which looks like this, to Micah, Dr. Clark, and Carlos. It was so fantastic. Thank you all so much. I know Rhonda mentioned at the beginning, this is the beginning of a conversation. It took us hundreds of years to get here. That means one Zoom conversation isn't going to, fix it. So CYN is going to be hosting a series, All Voices at the Table. Please follow us on Facebook. That's where we'll be announcing. Join our e-newsletter, and we'll be making more announcements for when more of these conversations are going to happen, and we hope that you all join us.